Against all odds, most of those aboard the Grosvenor had lived through the violent wreck. But the relief of survival quickly dissolved into a chilling new reality as dawn broke on August the 5th. They were marooned, not on some familiar shore, but on the coast of Africa. Shipwreck had always been synonymous with death in their minds. The terrifying prospect of being cast adrift had loomed large, but the notion of surviving such a disaster, only to find themselves utterly lost in an unknown land, was something few had ever contemplated. As Stephen Taylor eloquently put it in his book on the subject, The Caliban Shore, quote, "Seamen and passengers had, of course, escaped shipwrecks together before, but never had a company from so broad a spectrum of British society found itself so distant from old certainties, or so ignorant of the shore on which they were lost." This diverse group, torn from their familiar world, now face an uncertain future on a land that held both promise and peril. The Grosvenor narrative will reveal that most interactions with the local population proved perilous. This prompts a crucial question. Why were the Grosvenor survivors met with such indifference, especially considering the historical accounts of local people welcoming shipwrecked Europeans? The Amampondo, residing north of the Zuurveld, likely knew of the conflicts between settlers and the Amaxhosa. News spread rapidly along the coast. This awareness would have fostered suspicion towards a group of Europeans suddenly appearing, especially one displaying the flag of their oppressors. However, there may have been other contributing factors. As is often the case with African history, European accounts, prone to exaggeration, dominate the historical record. The perspectives of the African tribes they encountered exist primarily in oral tradition, their longevity compromised by South Africa's turbulent past. To truly grasp the formidable landscape the Grosvenor survivors faced, I figured that it would be enlightening to journey back through time, exploring earlier shipwrecks along this coastline. These stories, captivating in their own right, also illuminate the delicate balance between survival and human interaction that would define the Grosvenor's tragic fate. Our voyage begins with the first European ship known to have met its end in these treacherous waters, a story both dramatic and pivotal. Chapter 3: Before the Grosvenor. It was February 1552, and the Portuguese galleon, the Sao Joao, pulsed with the scent of triumph. Below deck, the air was thick with the biting tang of pepper, the delicate clink of Chinese porcelain, and the sharp perfume of exotic spices, all nestled amid sturdy timber and vibrant bolts of cloth. This was the smell of fortunes made, of lives soon to be returned to comfort. But the ship held more than cargo. It carried over 600 souls, 200 Portuguese, and more than 300 enslaved people, each dreaming of a different shore, a different future. At the helm stood Captain Manuel de Souza de Sepúlveda, his reputation preceding him. Back in Portugal, his name was synonymous with victory, forged in the crucible of wars and sieges in India's Gujarat territory. His influential involvement in these skirmishes had propelled him to the captaincy of the Sao Joao. Travelling with him was his privileged wife, Leonor, daughter of the Viceroy at Goa. Despite de Souza's ambition, his departure from Cochin on the Indian coast had been a frantic affair. His ship was tragically overloaded, ill-equipped with spare rigging, and destined to suffer on the long journey home. March arrived in the Indian Ocean, and with it, a menacing shift in the weather off the eastern coast of Africa. A furious storm descended, transforming the familiar rhythm of the sea into a violent assault. Sails were trimmed, the foremast canvas only partially unfurled as they cautiously edged the ship southwest. Just as they neared the African coast, the wind veered and the storm's fury redoubled. Gale-force winds shrieked through the rigging, and mountainous waves began to claw at the galleon. Water poured into the hold, inching its way up the timbers, and the Sao Joao began a sickening roll, teetering precariously on the edge of the abyss. For 3 relentless days, the tempest held them in its grip, each hour leaving its mark in splintered wood and strained seams. The ship's rudder, the very instrument of their control, suffered a critical blow, a secret the captain guarded closely, unwilling to surrender the last vestiges of hope among his terrified crew. As they limped southward, a violent gust tore the mainsail, leaving a gaping void where their primary means of propulsion had been. Then, a monstrous wave crashed against the port side. Rigging snapped like thread, and beams exploded into jagged fragments. Axes swung, severing the remnants of the mainmast and yard, their efforts frantic as they attempted to fashion a new spar from the wreckage. A scrap of sail was hoisted, and a temporary foremast wrestled into place, but the wind shredded this provisional setup apart as swiftly as it was raised. And then came the final blow. A rogue wave ripped away the already weakened rudder, leaving them utterly at the mercy of the storm. Without masts, sails, or the ability to steer, the horrifying reality sank in. Their only hope lay in the unpredictable embrace of the shore. The following days became a testament to human endurance and ingenuity, a grueling exercise in improvisation against the backdrop of the merciless sea. Laboring with raw hands and dwindling strength, they salvaged what they could from the remains of their once proud vessel, attempting to fashion a new rudder from splintered planks and to weave makeshift sails from scraps of fabric. Each swing of a tool, each knot tied, was a prayer against the inevitable. But their efforts proved futile. The makeshift rudder buckled and failed under the pressure of the waves. Then, on June the 7th, a cry pierced the sound of the wind and the sea. Land. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered anew. A small boat was launched, carrying a handful of crew members on a scouting mission to find safe anchorage. A desperate plan took shape: secure ropes between the shore and the sinking ship, and, in a perilous shuttle, ferry the passengers and precious cargo to the relative safety of the beach. But after only 3 trips, the Sao Joao groaned, shuddered, and began its final descent. The captain, still aboard the doomed ship, noticed that the lifeline to the beach had been severed. He and 40 others crammed into a small lifeboat and made a dash for the shore. The small craft slammed onto the beach, scattering its occupants onto the rocky shoreline. Yet, their relief was overshadowed by the cries of hundreds still trapped on the disintegrating galleon. The Sao Joao, now unmoored, was pushed by the current towards the sandy beach. With a final groan, it ran aground, the impact splitting its timbers, the once unified structure tearing into 2 massive pieces. Within the hour, these halves fractured further, splintering into 4, the decks collapsing and spilling their precious contents into the churning surf. The remaining survivors clung desperately to floating wreckage, most eventually being washed ashore, though an estimated 40 Portuguese and 70 enslaved people were lost to the waves. The bounty of the East, pepper, porcelain, spices, timber, cloth, now littered the beach, a testament to the disaster, its value immense, estimated at no less than 1,000 gold pieces. The Sao Joao, the first European vessel to succumb to the treacherous currents of Africa's east coast, was recorded to have wrecked on June the 7th, 1552, near the place we now call Port Edward. For 12 agonizing days, the exhausted Portuguese huddled on the unfamiliar shore, the wreckage of their hopes scattered like broken dreams before them. The sea's fury abated, but only to deliver them into the jaws of a new, more protracted ordeal. A grim truth settled in. Their only path to salvation lay inland, a terrifying journey into the unknown. For several months, approximately 100 Portuguese and 200 enslaved individuals embarked on a harrowing march. Each step was a desperate gamble against the elements and the unseen threats that lurked in the dense coastal forests, the swift-flowing rivers, and the treacherous marshes. The distant Portuguese settlements to their north lay some 600 kilometers away, but the winding paths they were forced to take likely doubled that distance. De Souza's wife, Leonor, accustomed to a life of luxury, was carried on a makeshift litter by servants and slaves. Death, a silent and unwelcome companion, stalked their every move. Starvation gnawed at their bellies, dehydration parched their throats, and violent encounters with the land's inhabitants and wild animals claimed many lives. Along this eastern coast, the local people had already witnessed the brutal reality of the slave trade, a trade recently and aggressively pursued by the Portuguese themselves. This history of exploitation undoubtedly fueled the suspicion and hostility towards the sudden appearance of these European castaways. The animosity grew so intense that Manuel de Souza, in moments of utter desperation, offered hundreds of gold coins to anyone brave enough to venture out and find fresh water. Their ultimate goal was to reach the river previously charted by Lorenzo Marques, a waterway that flowed into the relative safety of Boa Paz, what is now the Maputo River in southern Mozambique. There, they clung to the faint possibility of encountering passing Portuguese ships, their only real chance of rescue. The march became a gauntlet of peril, each day a new test of resolve. The landscape shifted from open plains to dense thickets, and with it, the temperaments of the people they encountered. One memory, sharp with the sting of betrayal, lingered. A kind local king had earnestly warned them of his neighbor's treacherous nature. Yet, desperation, a cruel advisor, pushed the Portuguese onward. They pressed into the unknown, across the marshy areas near today's Cozy Bay, driven by the gnawing hunger and the fading hope of rescue. The ambush came without warning. Shadows detached themselves from trees, and before the Portuguese could react, they were surrounded. Hands, unseen in the sudden chaos, tore at their few remaining possessions. Clothes, already tattered from months of exposure, were ripped from their bodies. Stripped bare, not just of their belongings, but of their dignity, a profound despair settled over the group. It was then that Leonor, a woman accustomed to silks and comfort, collapsed. The shame of her nakedness, the brutal reality of their plight, became an unbearable weight. She buried herself in the sand, her body a defiant curve against the earth, and refused to move. Her husband, Manuel, pleaded, his voice raw with grief and exhaustion, but her spirit, once so vibrant, had been extinguished on that desolate spot. Manuel de Souza, already a haunted figure since the trek had claimed his only son, could bear no more. His eyes, vacant with sorrow, scanned the dense jungle that pressed in on them. He turned, a silent movement, and walked into the shadows. The jungle swallowed him whole, and he was never seen again, another life claimed by the merciless land. Yet, even in this landscape of tragedy, a flicker of hope remained. Finally, after months of unimaginable hardship, a small band of survivors, 7 Portuguese, and 18 enslaved people reached the Maputo River. There, their prayers were answered. A Portuguese ivory merchant had heard whispers of shipwrecked men and, guided by a sense of humanity, or perhaps the lure of potential salvage, dispatched a search party. By May the 25th, 1553, almost a year after the catastrophic wreck of the Sao Joao, the exhausted survivors finally stumbled into the relative sanctuary of Delagoa Bay, their long nightmare at an end. Just 2 years after the Sao Joao splintered against the coast, the ocean delivered yet another Portuguese vessel to a similar, terrible fate. This was the Sao Bento, heavy with cargo and lives, which struck a shallow, unseen reef near the Msakaba River, a scant 40 kilometers south of its sister ship's demise. In the churning white foam, over 300 souls clung desperately to wreckage, a dark, living mass against the raging sea. Among them were 220 enslaved people, their already precarious existence now thrown into utter chaos. Those who somehow reached the wild, dune-flanked bay of Msakaba wasted no time. Survival, stark and immediate, demanded urgent action. They scavenged for food, tearing at the splintered timbers, and, with crucial foresight, gathered as many iron nails as their weary arms could carry. Each nail was a small fortune in a land where metal was a rare, coveted commodity. Their northward trek along the rugged coast began swiftly, a desperate race against starvation and the unknown. Yet, amidst the hardship, the castaways soon encountered familiar faces. Men from the Sao Joao, who, against all odds, had chosen a different path to survival. These men, having integrated into the local communities, appeared to have found a life of apparent ease, a contrast to the brutal realities of life at sea and the relentless march. A year crawled by, each day a test of endurance, before a meager group of 20 Portuguese and 3 enslaved individuals finally stumbled into Delagoa Bay, the ordeal etched into their gaunt frames, their eyes holding the distant, haunted look of those who had seen too much. Their brief 3-day stay at the Sao Bento wreck site, however, left a lasting mark, weaving itself into the very fabric of the land. Around Pondo fires, as nights deepened and stars blazed, tales began to circulate, a new mythology taking root. Stories of a giant utwembe, a massive wooden meat tray that had coughed white men onto their ancient, sacred shores. A century passed, and fate once more steered a Portuguese ship towards the treacherous wild coast. At the Umzumvubu River mouth, a place we now call Port St. John's, another maritime drama began. Captain Joseph de Cabrera commanded this vessel. His steady leadership proved as vital as any compass in the face of the sea's relentless assault. Seeking a safe harbour for his crippled vessel, he guided her into the wide mouth of the Umzumvubu, ensuring every soul found safety on the forest-edged beach. Soaked and shivering, the survivors huddled together. Dark figures emerged from the rolling hills, drawn by the promise of salvage. Tension hung heavy in the air. But Captain Cabrera, a shrewd negotiator as well as a mariner, found a way forward through trade. Salvaged steel and brass from the shattered ship were exchanged for the life-sustaining cattle of the local people. The desire for home ignited an extraordinary endeavor. With the assistance of the Amampondo, the castaways ventured into the dense coastal forest. The rhythmic thud of axes echoed through the trees as they felled timber. Months blurred into a relentless cycle of labor, fueled by shared hope. Slowly, painstakingly, 2 rudimentary ships began to take shape. Six months after their lives had been violently upended, these makeshift vessels were launched onto the river's current. The survivors entrusted their fate to capricious winds and currents. Their prayers were carried on the breeze for a safe passage around the Cape and northward towards Angola. 48 days at sea etched tales of hardship onto their weathered faces. Finally, Cabrera's ship, battered but afloat, limped into the harbour of Luanda, a testament to his unwavering resolve. The sea, however, remained a merciless adversary. The second vessel vanished beneath the waves, another tragic whisper in the lore of sailors. Cabrera's ability to connect with the Pondo people had saved half his crew, but burgeoning trade with the East ensured that more ships from distant lands would soon confront the brutal reality of this unforgiving African coast.
We're incredibly grateful to have a sponsor for this season of More Than a Story, and not just any sponsor, but one deeply connected to the very tale we're telling. Lambazi Lodge is supporting the show this season, and we're genuinely thrilled to introduce them to you. Explore the untamed wild coast and come away with unforgettable memories of the warm hospitality, the beautiful surroundings, and the sense of peace that lingers long after you leave. Just a short walk from the tunnel where treasure hunters once searched for the Grosvenor's lost riches, Lambazi Lodge offers a front row seat to history. But it's more than a historical landmark. It's the perfect base for families, fishermen, hikers, and adventurers looking to explore the untamed beauty of the wild coast. To plan your own escape, visit lambazilodge.com and use the promo code MoreThanAStory10 to get 10% off your booking during designated dates.
In 1684, the British ship, the Good Hope, set sail for the east coast of Africa. Her holds were destined to carry ivory and also human cargo. By May of the following year, she reached Rio de Natal, the very harbour Vasco da Gama himself had named. As the crew prepared for departure, a sudden, brutal gale slammed the Good Hope onto a sandbank. The splintering wood and groaning timbers confirmed the sailors' grim conviction. Their ship was lost. They frantically salvaged what they could, beginning to assemble a small decked boat that had been stowed away. Just as despair threatened to consume them, another English ship appeared at the river mouth. This vessel, sharing their trading ambitions, was preparing to sail further up the coast. 9 of the stranded sailors eagerly transferred, seeking passage north. But 5 men, led by the curious John Kingston, felt an irresistible pull to this new land and stayed. For months they explored, living among the local people, trading trinkets for sustenance and ivory. The welcome they received was unexpected. Open arms, generous portions of food, and eager engagements in trade. Within 8 months, their bartering yielded an impressive 3 tons of ivory. Then, their peaceful existence shattered with grim news. A Dutch East Indiaman, the Stavanese, returning from Bengal, had wrecked some distance to their south. A sense of obligation stirred the 5 Englishmen. With Pondo guides, they set off to find any survivors of this latest maritime disaster. 60 souls initially survived the Stavanese wreck, but the arduous journey towards the distant cape had claimed many. Some, injured and weary, remained near the shattered vessel, clinging to a desperate hope for repairs. By the time Kingston's small rescue party arrived, only 24 remained alive. These survivors had found unexpected sanctuary with the Amakosa, their tales of kindness convincing most to remain with their newfound protectors, including a young French boy from a different wreck who spoke of pirates and hostile Khoi before finding a home with the Xhosa chief. At the Stavanese wreck site, the remaining crew, fueled by desperate hope, had managed to patch up their battered ship. But as they attempted to launch, a monstrous wave crashed down, splintering the vessel and tossing the men into the churning surf. Many vanished beneath the waves. Those who clawed their way back to the beach found Kingston and his men waiting, a lifeline in the wreckage. Bruised and exhausted, the Stavanese survivors joined the Englishmen on a perilous 70-kilometer trek north, back to Rio de Natal. Back at the river, a renewed purpose took hold. The combined group, with the eager assistance of the local people, continued building their boat. The Pondo traded their labor and skill for simple goods, their generosity leaving a deep impression on the sailors. "They gave us enough meat and bread for 50 years, one later recalled, a testament to the profound kindness they encountered. As they toiled under the African sun, fate delivered yet another group of shipwrecked Europeans. Survivors of the Bonaventura, marching towards the Cape with flagging spirits, stumbled upon the boat-building site. Shared misfortune forged an immediate bond. With this sudden influx of hands, the boat neared completion. Provisions were loaded, and the weary sailors fixed their gaze on the distant cape. Yet, the allure of this land remained strong. 3 Englishmen from the Good Hope and 2 from the Bonaventura chose to stay, their lives now deeply intertwined with the rhythms of Africa. Ten days later, guided by favorable winds and currents, the makeshift boat finally reached Table Bay. 11 survivors from the Stavanese, 7 from the Bonaventura, and 2 from the Good Hope had defied the sea's fury. Their remarkable story, a testament to resilience and unexpected compassion, might have been lost forever were it not for their eventual arrival. The appearance of these survivors in Cape Town sparked immediate interest. Rescue missions were dispatched northward along the coast. To the astonishment of the search parties, they discovered 24 individuals who had chosen to integrate into the local communities. The accounts of these men, particularly of their description of the river and its people, cast a new light on a long-held belief. The port known as Rio de Natal, long assumed to be present-day Durban, was now understood to be the mouth of the Umzimvubu River on the wild coast. This revelation suggested a deeper, more complex history of the region, hinting that the name of the later province of KwaZulu-Natal might trace its origins to a place further south. The wrecks of the Good Hope, Stavanese, and Bonaventura became catalysts for a shift in understanding. The narrative spun by early Portuguese traders, painting the indigenous people as cruel and unsophisticated, crumbled in the face of these first-hand accounts. The San, Khoi, Amakosa, and other tribes along this coast possessed intricate social structures and economies that were, in many ways, more advanced than those of the settlers. They offered welcome and assistance, provided peace was offered in return. Yet, the prevailing European perspective, unfortunately destined to repeat its errors, largely dismissed the rich cultural tapestry of Africa as primitive and insignificant. The winter of 1755 held the Atlantic in its icy grip as the Dodington, a large British East Indiaman, pushed eastward towards India, St. Helena fading astern. The chief mate, a seasoned veteran of countless voyages, felt a prickle of unease. The crossing, which had begun placidly, had devolved into a furious battle against wind and wave as they rounded the formidable Cape of Good Hope. Relentless gusts and towering waves shoved them brutally off course. Then, cloaked by a savage winter storm, the inevitable occurred. The Dodington slammed into an unseen island a mere 6 miles off the coast of Algoa Bay. The impact ripped through the sturdy timbers, a violent tearing that abruptly ended many lives below deck. Those asleep in their cabins never stirred, victims of the sea's sudden fury. When the tempest finally relented, only 23 souls clung to life out of the original 276. The survivors, the chief mate, a carpenter, a Swedish blacksmith, and the ship's navigator among them, found themselves marooned. The days that followed bled into 7 harsh months on that small, barren island. Survival was a brutal mix of hoping for rain and foraging for fish, seals, birds, and whatever provisions they managed to salvage from the wreck. Bird Island became their prison, a constant reminder of their precarious existence. The gnawing hunger and the endless horizon spurred a desperate resolve. They had to escape. With ingenuity born of necessity, they turned the splintered bones of their former ship against itself. Timbers were wrestled into place, secured with nails painstakingly forged from salvaged steel. Slowly, a new vessel began to take shape. They christened their makeshift creation the Happy Deliverance, a defiant spark against their grim circumstances. Finally, in February 1756, their makeshift sails caught the wind, their course set for the distant Portuguese settlement in Mozambique, a faint beacon over 1,000 miles away. Months later, weary and weather-beaten, they steered their small craft into Delagoa Bay. Further good news awaited them as an English ship, the Rose, lay at anchor, having sailed from Bombay to trade ivory. The captain, hearing their tale, offered them passage without hesitation. The survivors were conveyed to Madagascar, and from there, across the Indian Ocean to Madras, where their extraordinary story could finally be told. The Dodington's demise quickly became more than just another maritime tragedy. Whispers spread, growing into widespread knowledge of her valuable cargo, the personal fortune of Robert Clive, the rising figure later known as Clive of India, a man whose wealth in Britain was already legendary. Clive himself had narrowly averted the wreck, a last-minute change of plans placing him on a different ship bound for India. However, his numerous crates of gold coins had not been so fortunate, sinking with the Dodington to the seabed. The fate of this immense treasure remained shrouded in mystery for centuries, a persistent rumor in maritime lore. Then, in 2001, over 1,000 18th century coins, their age and origin pointing strongly to the Dodington, surfaced at a London auction. This unexpected discovery ignited a fierce 4-year legal battle. Ultimately, 400 of those coins were returned to Port Elizabeth, a tangible link to the dramatic events of 1755. The annals of shipwrecks along this African coast preceding the Grosvenor present a multifaceted narrative. Danger was an ever-present shadow, yet it frequently intertwined with astonishing acts of generosity from the indigenous people. A discernible pattern emerges from the Khoi, who, following initial skirmishes with the Portuguese, engaged in commerce with the marooned Europeans, to the Amaxhosa, who extended refuge and comfort to those cast ashore, and the Amampondo, who actively contributed their expertise and materials to reconstruct wrecked vessels. While prudence and occasional distrust were comprehensible reactions to unexpected arrivals, numerous African tribes demonstrated a readiness to extend hospitality. These historical encounters unveil intricate relationships founded on trade, reciprocal necessity, and at times, unadulterated human empathy. The forthcoming accounts of the Grosvenor will starkly diverge from these established patterns. The survivors of that catastrophe would encounter predominantly suspicion and antagonism, prompting profound inquiries into the specific conditions and evolving dynamics that shaped their tragic interactions with the locals. Their ordeal would forever be etched as a uniquely poignant chapter in the extensive history of shipwrecks along Africa's coast. Join us next week as we return back to Lambazi Bay. The Grosvenor survivors, now facing a brutal test of endurance, will begin their long march towards the Cape Colony. Thanks again to Lambazi Lodge and Active Escapes for their support this season. If you're enjoying the series, please take a moment to share and rate the show. Your support significantly boosts our visibility. A heartfelt thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. We are thrilled to have reached listeners in over 25 countries, from the UK, Australia, and the US, to our newest audience members in the DRC, Tanzania, and Zambia. Thanks for tuning in. The diverse and enchanting stories of Africa hold immense power, acting as vital threads in the tapestry of continental understanding and unity. By unpacking these tales, we gain profound insights into the shared human experiences and unique identities, ultimately contributing to a more cohesive and unified Africa.